Okay, Johnny, let's do a little lesson. Maga. If Mandy has 2 apples and she puts one away, how many apples does she have? No, I got it. What'd I do? Now, Johnny, no, let's think for a sec. If Mandy has 2 apples and she takes away 1, how many does she have left? What about 2? This generation's cooked. Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to be talking about the anti-intellectualism crisis that is facing young people right now. Because things are honestly not looking the best. And I think that this is something that's been a long time coming, if I'm being honest, because we've seen slow but sure strides towards making critical thought, informed and dependent thought, and the general connection of like and unlike concepts together uncool, and have normalized things that some consider anti-intellectual, like brain rot or the over-reliance on AI. And the results of this over the past couple of years are really starting to show themselves, especially with how we as young people interact with each other and other generations both on and offline. And I fear that this large-scale rise in anti-intellectualism and lack of critical thought is going to result in some pretty scary outcomes for us moving forward. And in this video, I want to break down exactly why that is, what is anti-intellectualism, why things like critical thinking and media literacy are especially important for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as well as talking about what lies ahead of us if things don't change the way that they're going. We really have a lot to dig into, so if you are new to the channel and like content like this, then definitely hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and consider following me on my other socials like Instagram, TikTok if it still is around by the end of this month, and Twitter, all at Imurgency. But let's first frame this conversation, because I feel like I've been using a lot of big words. What is intellectualism? Well, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, intellectualism is defined as the ability to think about or discuss a subject in a detailed and intelligent way without involving your emotions or feelings. Think back to school, or think to school if you are currently in school. The way that teachers were trying to get you to reflect on material that you learned or read, making educated or informed guesses or statements, backed by things like evidence, prior knowledge, or related contexts. Like think back to those annoying times in class where you'd be reading a book and a teacher's like, so what do we think the significance of the color red is in the main character's outfit? Could there be anything symbolic about the color red? Maybe something related to the political and economical state of the world right now? When you think of intellectualism, just think of thinking more critically and a little deeper than surface level about whatever topic you're talking about. And now let's frame that around anti-intellectualism. Anti-intellectualism is the hostility to and mistrust of intellect, intellectuals, and intellectualism, commonly expressed by the deprecation of education and philosophy and the dismissal of art, literature, history, and science as an impractical, politically motivated, and even contemptible human pursuits. An attack or a movement against the pursuit of knowledge, essentially. And I think oftentimes when we have conversations online about anti-intellectualism, the term is often confused or even sometimes conflated with the term unintelligence, which is a general lack of formal education. But these two things aren't the same thing. In fact, the difference between intelligence and intellect, as described by historian Richard Hofstadter, who actually wrote the 1963 book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, essentially anti-intellectualism and unintelligence can go hand in hand, but they're inherently different. Although sentiments and feelings towards anti-intellectualism can and oftentimes do allow for unintelligent ways of thinking to grow and become more popular. One way to more easily understand the difference between the two is intelligence is more of an understanding of what is happening, where intellect can be more of an understanding of why something is happening, if that makes sense. Not necessarily one-to-one, but just to get the vibe. And the reason why I'm harping on this so much is because I think it's important to break down the difference between these two things, because people often say Gen Z is dumb, they're just a bunch of anti-intellectuals, or will conflate the sometimes unintelligent things that young people do because they are young with the concept or notion of being an anti-intellectual. So now that we have that framework, let's talk about how intellectualism actually does impact Gen Z and has been impacting a lot of online culture, which has been steering us into some unsavory waters. And caring for people is the foundation behind how we can better the world, which is why I'm so happy to partner with this video's sponsor, Bombas. Bombas is a comfort-focused premium basics brand with a mission to help those in need. They're a purpose-driven brand that sell the top 1, 2, and 3 most requested items from homeless shelters, that being socks, underwear, and t-shirts. And each time an item is purchased from Bombas, another is donated to those who need them. Bombas has already donated over 150 million items and is truly a brand that makes you look good while also doing good. I'm grateful that Bombas has been a long-term sponsor of the channel, and if you've been watching my recent videos, you know that I've been loving their athletic running socks for my marathon training / daily runs. But if you're not into running or super sporty like that, that is fine because Bombas also has you covered with some of the most perfect cozy gear for the winter, with things like their warm merino wool socks and their cushiony Sherpa slippers. Merino's natural temperature regulating properties keep your feet cool when it's hot and warm when it's not, so they're truly comfy for any season. And I actually got me a pair of these green merino wool house socks, and I've been loving wearing them around my house to keep my feet warm during this cooler season. So if you too are a bit chilly or are in the market for new socks, underwear, shirts, or slippers, then you too can feel good and do good with Bombas, knowing that your purchase is doing some real good. Bombas has hooked all my viewers up with a great deal. New customers get 20% off their first purchase by going to bombas.com/emergency and using code emergency at checkout. Thank you so much, Bombas, for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into it. So as of lately, for no specific reason at all, of course, and I don't know if you've been noticing this on your online spaces or not, but I've been seeing more prevalence in these statements whenever there is like any sort of discourse online, or if something that happens in the world that people are reacting to doesn't necessarily sit right with someone and offers some critique or offers some analysis on said situation, that people will respond to that response, kind of making that person seem a little crazy for thinking that deeply into whatever it is that happened. I know that's very broad, but we'll get there. Like, let's say for an example, a celebrity goes to a carpet and wears a very specific color that can have something to do or some relevance with anything that happened in the world. Let's say there's like a big disaster. Let's use, for example, something that people have talked about endlessly, like the rise in like trad wife culture or like trad wife content online. And someone makes a comment talking about how it's interesting that the rise in trad wife or traditional living content has become popular around the same time that conservatism globally has been going up as well. And almost without fail, you'll see someone responding to that comment with something along the lines of, it's not that deep, or let's just let people enjoy things, or even posting that one picture of that one TikToker saying like that one friend that's too woke. Like, these are all memes, phrases, or sayings that all have similar sentiments of anti-intellectualism, or just generally shutting down a conversation that some people may deem as thinking too deeply into it, when there is and can be a lot of merit in actually having that conversation, because like most things are, things can be connected and there may be reasons behind why things are happening the way that they are. And that kind of gets to the core of anti-intellectualism, because a lot of times anti-intellectualism can be much more politically and socially charged than simply just like not knowing enough, or having someone not knowing what to do with the information that's brought before them.
But recently, when I'm scrolling on the timeline and I see someone call out misogyny or racism or just something problematic, that one ass screenshotted meme of the one friend that's too woke is always in the replies. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with the original creator of that video, because like, as most things on the internet start out, it was just a cute, silly little video, purposely a little joke about people who aren't real activists and just people who want to have that moral high ground. Now, because the internet's the internet, anytime somebody's actually calling out something that's real and problematic, people are using that meme as you're trying to ruin all the fun. Like, genuinely just brought out some of the worst people, or the worst in people. So this is me saying, can we enjoy the original video? Because like I said, the original video is funny, and stop using it to excuse bigotry. Well, because I've been on the internet long enough to know, I do understand that there are people out there on the internet, a lot of people out there on the internet, that are like, if you made bean soup, well, what about if I don't like beans, which is a video that exists, and the creator Molly, go watch that video because it's really funny and it makes me laugh, and she's so correct. If you don't like beans, don't have bean soup. Or the whataboutism crowd of, if I'm talking about a certain marginalized community, or another creator's talking about a certain marginalized community, and somebody's like, well, what about this marginalized community? Do they just not matter? It's like, I'm focusing on this one group. Said creator's focusing on this one group in this video. There's already probably other videos out there that exist about said group. Nuance exists. Kisses!
Comments like these, while they may seem innocent or like they're not trying to engage in like a big discourse right now, really do on a larger scale prevent, and oftentimes even shame, critical understanding of the why and the how, and encourage people online to just accept things as they are when a further analysis or critique can lead us to an understanding of why we've gotten to this point and where we're going because of it. It's almost the equivalent to like that one friend whenever conversations get a little bit too deep or a little bit too heated. They're like, all right, guys, let's not talk about politics, or guys, it's not that serious. Like, we can just all agree to disagree when like real conversations need to be had. And going beyond the surface level for conversations, it's not even just like political or like social or whatever. It can be even interpersonal, can really lead to a deeper level of understanding of A, the person or people you're talking to, or B, the concepts or structures that you're talking about. And I think that the normalization of this kind of language can be really harmful and destructive towards meaningful conversations about things that actually matter. Because again, the media that we consume, the media that we normalize, does have an effect on our culture. We've seen it time and time again. And I really think that these reductive takes and replies on and in our memes really have done more damage to the online collective culture than we may think. Like, speaking personally, there are so many times where even in my close conversations with my friends who I know think similarly to me, or at least also like having critical conversations about the world around us, that I've started to preface even my like most lukewarm of takes with not to be the friend that's too woke, but well, most of the time it's just to me more like just a joke. It's important to understand there's always some truth to like these jokes or these memes. Like, there's some impact with this. There is, to some level, the acknowledgement that like, hey, I know it seems like I'm looking a little bit too far into this, or it may seem like I'm about to take the fun out of this seemingly innocuous or harmless situation, but here we go. And it's kind of wild to feel like that, but also understandable for why and how we got there. Big side note incoming. But I personally think the reason why so many of us are afraid or hesitant to become too intellectual or like too woke, hate that word, is because of cancel culture and how a lot of the discourse that has taken place on social media has played out over recent years. Like, we have to talk about how there is this level of virtue signaling and holier than thou attitude that has come with a lot of these conversations online, where people pick apart every little aspect of everyday people's character because they were not fully analyzing, fully thinking, or seeing the deeper implications behind the things that they had said offhand. And again, I'm not talking about like serious offenses here. Like, I'm not talking about like you hopped on live and just started slurring at people. I'm talking about cases where like you have the average everyday person not knowing the exact correct language to use in different situations because they haven't been in that situation before. And people ganging up on them and villainizing them as if they are the scum of the earth for making a mistake. And I'd argue that that era of cancel culture, we're still definitely kind of in it, does not necessarily promote the intellectualism that I think that a lot of people that are trying to hold these people accountable in their own way are aiming for. In fact, I think that it's actually doing the opposite. I think that the way that people have historically held people accountable online has encourage people to embrace anti-intellectualism more. And let me explain. You can only tell someone you're so dumb, ignorant, or just generally insult their intelligence, aptitude, or life experience so much before people will just start to shut you out and almost begin to embrace all the things that you're saying about them. It's almost like the concept of like, oh wow, if you think I'm so bad, why try to be good at this point? Like, let me prove you right. Let me give you something to be mad about. And I'm not saying this is the correct response to that, but that's inevitably what has been happening. If you think of prominent influencers that have been canceled in recent years, or problematic behavior that isn't super harmful and is just like a learning lesson, but the internet kind of jumped them for a little bit, they tend to go farther away from where we want them to go. Like, yes, for influencers, a lot of that can be attributed to them wanting to capitalize on the attention being on them and the hate, turning the hate into money. But there also is really a pipeline for like canceled influencers to like alt-right spokespeople. And what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that's an experience exclusive to influencers. I think that does happen also for your everyday person. It's similar to what we were talking about in my video about the rise in conservatism within Gen Z men. The internet pushes these people out in a way which can isolate them and lead them to be more susceptible to mis and disinformation and inevitably bigotry. And I think doing this over and over again has made the internet such a hostile environment and a place where it feels like people just don't necessarily care for each other as much. So getting back on the topic of like internet hostility because of all of this, it's not hard to see the growing internet hostility that takes place online. Like, I don't know if you've been noticing this, but like the internet is just a meaner place than it used to be. It honestly has reminded me to almost like early internet days before like all the internet regulation and guidelines came on, where people would just say and do and post anything. Like, we're in this era where it's just so normal to be cruel to people, and it's not just the comments too, it's also the creators. It's more so normalized now to just hate, like to be a hater and to say the most vile, the most defaming, or the most obscene things about people with little to no actual repercussion. And I think this has created a culture where there is not a lot of room to make honest mistakes on the internet, or to really exist authentically on the internet anymore, especially not in spaces of discourse like TikTok or Twitter, because it feels like for those platforms, and then for the internet as a whole to a different degree, that the benefit of the doubt is no longer afforded to people, or rather I'd say that it's intentionally dismissed in favor of either misrepresenting or going out of your way to miss the point or paint someone you don't agree with or generally like as a terrible human being that's a master manipulator trying to use their ulterior motives to ruin everyone's way of life. And like I said, these cycles of ridicule don't really provide space to everyday people online, which can cause them oftentimes to just go isolate and go further into their own belief systems, not really listening to outside noise. Also, not defending these people and saying that they are completely in the right or don't need to be held accountable. I think it's just the way that we go about doing it and the way that it comes across can be fixed. Like, I think we really do need to check in with ourselves whenever these things do happen, and they happen a lot, where we have to take a step outside of ourselves and really think and ask ourselves, like, what do we really want to change about the situation? And is how we're reacting conducive to that change actually happening? Because I think oftentimes we react a certain way in a way to get people to act differently, but it actually just pushes them further to not growing and continuing on as they were. But we kind of got a little off topic there. I think that all kind of relates to anti-intellectualism because that's kind of what's brought us here. But now let's talk about critical thought and the importance of it and why it's important for young people to practice actively.
I do not, and I absolutely refuse to become incompetent for the sake of convenience. Hear me out. Your affinity towards convenience will turn you into a pile of mush that can be easily influenced, easily taken advantage of. And this is how we are losing our rights. This is how society as we know it is crashing and burning, because everyone is addicted to convenience.
I think that there's this real fear, not necessarily fear, but aversion by the general public of difficult conversations and critical thought. I've made videos in the past talking about the state of education for young people, but I think what's really important to take from those conversations into this one is the ability and comfortability with critical and nuanced thought and conversations. In my opinion, critical thinking is something that's taught, and from there is something that is learned in either an educational setting or through a series of repeated real life situations that teach you to think critically and to put pieces together. I think that critical thinking is inherent to everybody, but you kind of got to grow it and nurture it and become better at critical thinking. Like, it's a skill that the majority of people are able to do. It's just like any skill, something you have to actively work at and use often to keep that skill sharp. But if you don't use it, you kind of not necessarily fully lose it, but it becomes less and less keen, if that makes sense. And to my last point, when we normalize things not being that deep or generally disincentivize using critical thought because it keeps the fun and is more convenient and light, we're losing recipes, we're losing skills here. And I think that not just because of the memes, because memes are important. Talking about how memes have historically impacted culture and how they are essentially this generation's political cartoons, but also through conversations that are had and through the way that we communicate with each other online and offline. It's not as popular to read in between the lines healthily as it may used to have been. I think a lot of times now when people say like read in between the lines, it kind of gives like woo-woo conspiracy theorist. I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean like just like make it up. That kind of sounds similar or sounds like it would make sense. Like reading in between the lines is in like making an inference based on like evidence, precedent, and pattern recognition to find what is really being unsaid. But speaking about evidence and all that, let's talk about some historical precedents for anti-intellectualism as a way to lead us into the conversation about where we're going if we continue on this track. So, as you may or may not have guessed, there is actually a long history and a long lineage of precedents behind anti-intellectualism pushes in culture and where that has brought us as humans. For example, I present to you La Noche de los Batones Largos, or the Night of Long Batons in Argentina, where professors and students were violently attacked or removed from the University of Buenos Aires in July of 1966, to which the aftermath of that led to Argentina's brain drain. Another example, and an extreme example, being the where highly educated and intellectual thinkers, such as doctors, lawyers, and scholars, were targeted and persecuted. You had great minds like Albert Einstein flee Germany to the US partially for this reason. The other big reason being him being Jewish. But again, you're seeing this exodus of intellectual thinkers and the value of education. You have the Cambodian genocide, where anyone considered an intellectual thinker. I have written here that sometimes even people were targeted for wearing glasses and simply looking intellectual. Bringing it even closer to home, you have things from slavery and Jim Crow in the US, which prevented enslaved Black people from learning how to read and write and from having formal education, with the common theme of all these things being a militant, oftentimes authoritarian governments and regimes seeing knowledge and education as a threat to not only their power but also their influence, and began taking extreme measures to silence and suppress those voices. Now, all that is fine and dandy. How does that relate to anything we got going on today? Well, as we've talked about, there are a couple of ways where we're seeing intellectualism be challenged and knowledge be disincentivized. I think oftentimes when people try to make connections like this to things that happened in the past, to things that happen now, I think the common reaction is like, oh, we're not seeing anything that drastic happen today. Like, things aren't that bad, you're just being dramatic. But I think what's important to understand about modern times and precedented times of the past is that almost everything that happens in modern times is more covert and more so gradual than times of the past. And that's because it's easier to have changed that way. We've already seen now in this country the banning of certain books, with some states and schools even burning books, talking about or pertaining to topics that people don't agree with. The banning of entire genres or topics based on the thought that people shouldn't feel bad about the past and feel bad about the country that they currently live in because of the messed up things that the country systemically did in the past that still has an impact today. Like, we're seeing these gradual pushes towards anti-intellectualism. It's just a matter of how are we going to address them. And I think one of the newer main drivers towards anti-intellectualism actually is what is now being hailed as mankind's latest and greatest innovation, and that is artificial intelligence and AI. Since AI has become popular, it's become one of the newest indicators for media literacy and just general discernment. Like, the point of artificial intelligence is that you're creating something that is almost, if not one-to-one, to human creation. So in an ideal world, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference between something that is artificially generated and organically generated. And we've been seeing the impacts of that more and more now, with people not being able to recognize AI images, especially for ones that have been used in fake news headlines. Like, for example, the initial fake Trump mugshot, or even misleading or damaging photos or videos of celebrities, as we've seen happen in previous years. People have been struggling to be able to recognize fake items that they're purchasing online because of AI. Like that lady on TikTok that bought the decorative bow for $5, and it turned out to be a printed picture of a bow and not the actual product itself. Or like those viral crystal cups that were being sold on TikTok and Temu, where they were selling these really beautiful crystal mugs for a really cheap price, shockingly cheap price, where it doesn't make sense that it would be this cheap for something this high quality. That's also sort of where the critical thinking comes in, where that sounds too good to be true, so it's likely not. The price to find those minerals, to shape them into a mug and cup, and to ship them off to you to make a profit, there is no way to have that cup actually be $5 or $10, what have you, for you to be buying off the TikTok shop. That just doesn't make sense when the materials for that would cost so much more for that. And because people are seeing these AI images and taking them as oh yeah, that looks real, that must be real, they're being scammed out of money and taken advantage of financially, and also intellectually as well. And this is where we sort of break off from just Gen Z, because anti-intellectualism is not just a Gen Z thing. It's never been just a Gen Z thing. It spans through generations, but since Gen Z is hailed as the internet generation, and many of the more recent forms of anti-intellectualism rely on the internet and technology, the two get conflated. But it's not just Gen Z. But where Gen Z does get a lot of the flack in the conversation about anti-intellectualism and AI comes with school stuff, with Gen Z and Gen Alpha using AI tools like ChatGPT to summarize things like articles or books without actually reading them. Again, broad scale relating to the whole topic of the video, cutting down on people's actual time spent reading and analyzing and coming to conclusions about media that they're consuming themselves, and are instead being fed the bullet points for what AI believes to be the most important and critical points of whatever media is being analyzed.
I think the stupidest cycle that's happening in college right now is a student having to agree not to use AI before taking a course, and then in turn that professor uses AI to grade their paper, and the AI mistakenly thinks that a quote that a student is using from a text that was approved is plagiarism, and the AI is your whole paper was used with ChatGPT. It's a constant cycle where the student always loses
Like you can even see it now with Google. Like you hop online and make any Google search, the first part of Google AI will tell you a summarized list of the most important things that it compiles from a bunch of websites, essentially taking out the need to research. And I think that a lot of people, especially like the tech bros, really harp on the aspect of like, oh, this is so time efficient, saving people so much time. You don't have to spend time researching or like digging through all these articles to find the points that you want to make your point. You can just ask it a question and get the points you need and move on. Like, yes, but then also you have to think about what you're losing in order to get that. You're losing the act of research. I think that's something that's important because it requires you to check your sources against each other. I'm not sure that AI is necessarily doing that for checking the validity of sources and coming to your own conclusions about whatever you're reading or watching. Like if anything, you're doing critical thinking based on the summary that AI thinks is most important. Getting back to school stuff though, I've also seen like those websites where you're able to upload like full PDF documents to this one website. Well, I can watch the text flash on screen and AI summarize it as there's like a Minecraft parkour video going in the background, essentially making the document a lot more low impact and easier to understand. Although I will say that oftentimes I've tried it myself. It does miss out on a lot of actually important points and misses out on a lot of the context and nuance behind whatever you're uploading into that simulator. So you're not necessarily getting the full story that you would normally get if you actually just like read the article yourself. And again, this is all to say that we really need to be mindful about the content that we're consuming and also the way that we are engaging online and the conversations that we're having online, making sure that anti-intellectualism does not become the norm, because historically speaking, that never usually ends well. We need to make sure that we're still prioritizing critical thought. We're still prioritizing education, because these aren't just tools for personal growth. They're essentially vital for societal progress. So I leave you with this. Maybe next time someone does make a little bit of a reach online, instead of saying it ain't that deep, maybe ponder to yourself, perhaps it goes deeper. But yeah, y'all, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, took something away from it. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you been noticing this rise in anti-intellectualism, or do you think I am full of poop? I always love the conversations we have in the comments, so be sure to let me know. Also, before you go, don't forget to subscribe if you're new, leave a like on this video, and to follow me on my socials at Imurgency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. But other than that, y'all, I've been Imurgency, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.